my name's Molly. I'm a clinical associate psychologist working in Talking Therapies, Hampshire, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the importance of psychology in the treatment of FND and why seeing a psychologist doesn't mean that FND isn't a real condition or that the symptoms are all in your head. So what is FND? So earlier, Tom mentioned that hardware-software metaphor, which goes something like this. If you were a computer, FND is like having a software problem rather than a hardware problem. The computer might keep crashing or work really slow and freeze. However, you wouldn't solve the problem by opening up the computer, and you wouldn't see anything if you didn't X-ray the computer or if you scanned it every 3 months. Instead, what you'd have to do to solve the problem is by working out what was going wrong and reprogramming the computer. So as we can see on the slide, the metaphor is that computer hardware is working fine. In real life, that would apply to there being no damage to the nervous system or to the body that's causing the symptoms, or any structural changes and any other existing medical diagnoses are not responsible for the range and severity of those symptoms. Instead, there's a problem with the internal software of the computer, so it's been programmed incorrectly. And in our real life example, that means that there is a problem with how information is processed between the brain and the body. So there's a miscommunication occurring between the brain and the body, and the brain isn't sending and receiving signals properly. So we have to reprogram the software. So the brain and the body work together, and this means that a range of things can trigger FND symptoms, and there's a range of things that can make FND symptoms worse. So in terms of attention, we've already had some really nice examples explaining that we have these two different attentional systems. One that's like an autopilot, where our spotlight of attention is running below our level of awareness. And we also have more conscious and deliberate spotlight of attention that we tend to use when things are new, or we need to check out things, or something unexpected happens. Most of the time, we want most of our actions and bodily sensations to be below our level of awareness. So in talking to you now, I don't want to have to be aware of how to talk and how to produce language. It just happens. But for different reasons, there can be a switch in our attention so that we become very aware of our bodies, and then our actions might become effortful and stop becoming automatic. And this can be really unhelpful and distressing, and we know that changes to attention are a big part of the development and maintenance of FND symptoms. And when we look at how we cope, so our behaviour and our lifestyle changes, it's also really important to keep that in mind when we're thinking about FND. So for example, when we're unwell, it's understandable that we might rest or spend lots of time lying down, and this can lead to unintended changes, like becoming more isolated from friends and family. And in turn, this way of coping can lead to physical deconditioning, isolation, and distress, causing a negative spiral and making symptoms and quality of life much worse. Also, how we feel emotionally is really important. So emotions are in our bodies and our brain, and sometimes it can be helpful to think about them as energy in motion. And so this means that feeling sad, hopeless, frustrated, or anxious can create very real chemical and physical changes in the body that will affect FND symptoms. So why is psychology important or relevant? So the psychology aspect does not mean that symptoms are not real or that they're all in your head. There are really extremely complex interactions between our bodies and our brains, so that what's happening in our bodies, our thoughts and emotions, and what we do are all important to understanding and treating FND. The brain and body are constantly communicating with each other, but communication between the brain and the body is an interaction. And so what happens in the body can change what happens in the brain, and then what happens in the brain and our mind can change what happens in our body. For example, breathing is usually automatic and below our spotlight of attention. But if we pay attention to breathing, or something happens to suddenly make us aware of our breathing, then our breathing can change. Or if we think about food, just thinking about our favorite food can make us start to have more saliva. And the brain can also override automatic bodily responses depending on the situation. For example, if you were to pick up a really hot plate, you can hold on to this so that you don't drop the plate and spill all the contents on the floor. So how can psychological therapies help? So psychological therapies can help to learn ways of managing and coping with symptoms of FND. And we just wanted to provide a bit more insight into the role of psychological therapies and how they can help. So we can support to build an understanding of that mind-body connection and to develop strategies to manage the impact that symptoms have on mood and functioning. And unresolved trauma and PTSD can increase a person's threat response and threat system. And therefore, psychological therapy can address trauma symptoms that may be contributing to problems. And we can support people to develop an understanding of their emotions, the role that they play, and to learn helpful ways of managing them. Psychological therapy can also provide a space to explore what's important in our lives, our values, and to learn ways of reconnecting to those alongside living with difficult FND symptoms. And therapy provides an opportunity to build confidence in managing FND symptoms and developing support systems. And they can help a person to develop an understanding of the impact that the psychological factors can have on FND and how these might be maintaining or worsening symptoms, and then learn ways of overcoming these. So one example of how we might support someone who is experiencing dissociative seizures, maybe if someone has stopped leaving their house due to being fearful of falling over or collapsing in public. And it's understandable that the longer a person avoids leaving the house, the greater the anxiety will build. And they may start experiencing physical symptoms such as heart racing, shaking, or feeling hot, even when thinking about needing to leave the house. Therefore, we can support people to gradually expose themselves to going out and doing activities which are meaningful for them, to build their social networks and support networks, and to learn relaxation techniques, and also to learn to be more self-compassionate towards themselves and their experiences. Another example may be for someone who has experienced past trauma and is living with symptoms of PTSD. We can offer specific trauma-focused therapy to help a person to understand and manage reliving symptoms such as nightmares and flashbacks, which may be playing a role in FND. It is really important to consider timing and readiness for therapy, as it requires commitment to change. And people who respond best to psychological therapy are those who are open to understanding a different perspective, and those who are motivated to learn ways of managing and coping with symptoms. We briefly wanted to summarize one psychological approach which has been found to be helpful with FND. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, is a type of talking therapy which can help manage difficulties by changing how we think and how we behave. The way we think about things can have a huge impact on how we feel and our emotions, on our physical symptoms, and how we respond or act. An example of how we might use CBT is exploring the role of unhelpful thinking and learning ways of addressing our thoughts. For example, a situation may lead us to experience negative or unhelpful thoughts, which will affect how we react in terms of our behaviors, our physical reactions and feelings, and our emotional responses. Our reactions will then feed back into our thoughts and may over time maintain our negative thinking. For example, in relation to leaving the house, Someone with FND may experience thoughts such as, I'm not the person I used to be. What if I develop seizures? What if something bad happens? What if I collapse or fall unconscious and can't get help? And these thoughts will then understandably affect how someone feels. They're feeling quite anxious and fearful, how they respond, potentially avoiding leaving the house, missing appointments, reducing activity levels, and they may start to notice an increase in unpleasant physical sensations, so things like heart racing, feeling nauseous, and feeling dizzy. That will also have an impact on people's physical health and FND symptoms. That activation of the threat system is likely to contribute to worsening communication between the systems and therefore increasing the severity of FND symptoms. The more this cycle is repeated, the more believable the thoughts become, and over time, the physiological stress response gets stronger and maintains anxiety, low mood, and feelings of distress. Therefore, therapy will support someone to understand the role of their thinking in maintaining these feelings and to learn ways of reappraising situations and addressing unhelpful thoughts. CBT can also be used to help address behaviours. Some people don't recognise lots of these worrying thoughts, but the same processes might be playing out. There can be different ways through talking therapies that we can help people to reset the threat system. Another approach may be through addressing unhelpful behaviours and actions or using a values-based approach. For example, we might support people with gradual exposure to feared situations and helping people to gradually become more comfortable in feared situations. Symptoms can feel very unpleasant and they are very real, but it's how we respond to them that can keep us stuck. And NHS Talking Therapies offers free evidence-based psychological therapies in a range of modalities, such as phone, video, or face-to-face. There are different therapies available, such as guided self-help or online education modules, workshops and webinars, group therapy, and individual therapy. So how do people access talking therapies? You would need to refer to local talking therapy services. So nearby local services include Hampshire, Southampton, Portsmouth, and the Isle of Wight. And you can use the NHS website to find your local NHS talking therapy service. You can then refer in different ways, either by self-referring by phone or filling out an online form. This is the easiest way to refer into our service. Alternatively, if that isn't possible, you can ask for a professional such as your GP to make a referral on your behalf. You may then be offered an initial assessment to identify your support needs and the appropriate intervention. Thank you very much. I hope you found this useful.